Good morning. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be back in the US, especially after the last 3 years we've all just been through. I really don't think you can beat a good face-to-face meeting. So it's really nice to be here today. And thank you, Preben, for your talk just then. I'm going to talk about the other population of Hooper swans in Europe, the Icelandic population. Just before I get going, a little bit about me. I'm Kane Bride. I've worked for the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust based at Slimbridge in the UK for the last 13 years, although I've been involved with the trust for a lot longer than that. I've been there for 21 years, if you include my voluntary time there. As part of my work for the last 13 years, I've coordinated the UK's goose and swan monitoring programme, which is responsible for reporting to statutory government agencies in the UK on all of our native and migratory goose and swan species. I've interests in and I've worked on mute swans, Burek swans and Hooper swans, and I've assisted with WWT's long-term life history ringing programs on Hooper swans and Burek swans. And finally, I've led expeditions up to Arctic Russia to help catch and ring Burek swans, and in my own time, I spend a lot of my summer holidays in Iceland. Wrapped up in my winter gear, as you do, because I can't think of any better way than spending your summer holidays than catching Hooper swans in Iceland. Ron, you'll agree with that. Okay, so yeah, Preben just talked about the Northwest mainland European population. I'm talking about the Icelandic population. It's one of 5 recognized flyway populations of Hoopers in the world. I'm not too sure why the eastern population isn't represented on this map here, but there is a 5th population here. The Icelandic population breeds widespread across the country in Iceland. Smaller numbers breed on the Faroe Islands, and smaller numbers breed in the UK, less than 20 pairs in Scotland. And the population winters primarily in Britain and Ireland, and Iceland itself, with smaller numbers wintering on mainland Europe, and I'll touch upon that a little later in my presentation. It carries out one of the longest sea crossings of any swan species, and over the last 42 years, it's been intensively studied through a ringing programme set up by the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust in collaboration with Icelandic ringers and the Irish Hooper Swan Study Group. Okay, so the International Swan Census for the Icelandic population occurs every 5 years. In 2020, it was our 8th census, and the primary objective is to update the total population estimate. It also aims to assess midwinter distribution and habitat choice and use by the population. And also we aim to undertake a coordinated age assessment. Now, through our annual monitoring in the UK, we monitor productivity every year through a dedicated count network of volunteers. However, during the 5-year census, we aim to try and take a bigger sample size of the population. And so a little bit about the methods. The census is timed to coincide with the International Waterbird Census, which occurs every January, when many waterbird counters are already out and about counting waterbirds. And we enlist the help of waterbird counters, of bird watchers and professional conservation staff. And given the tendency to roost at wetland sites, but feed away from wetland sites, especially around agricultural areas in Britain, we placed additional effort into trying to find the Hoopers at non-wetland habitats, which took quite a bit of coordination. And given the remoteness of Iceland, and especially the difficulty in accessing the country, especially during winter, we enlisted the help of an aerial census that was undertaken by staff up there. And for the first time ever, we promoted the census heavily on social media, especially on Twitter, to try and get the backing and support of birdwatchers in the UK and Ireland. And it appeared heavily in the media too, on television, in newspapers, on radio. And the results of the census were written up in Wildfowl 71 and published last year. Okay, so we updated the population estimate. The new derived population estimate came in at 43,255 swans, which when you compare that to when censuses first started for this population in 1986, that was a 158% increase. Just over 16,500 Hoopers were counted during the first census. And when we compare the 2020 census result to the 2015 result, that saw an increase of 27.2% in numbers. And it is a steadily increasing population, and it has increased year on year throughout each census, with the exception of 1995. However, we consider that potentially as being an undercount. And then when we look at the percentage of the overall census, you can see that in England and lumped with the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, and Wales, the population has been increasing year on year on each census. It's fluctuated a little bit more in Scotland, declined throughout each census in the Republic of Ireland. Likewise, numbers in Ireland have been Northern Ireland have been a bit more up and down and stabilized generally in Iceland with the overwintering population there. Excuse me. And distribution, when we draw down into distribution of where the birds were overwintering in Iceland, I've put up 3 maps there, one from the 1995 census, one from 2000, and the current 2020 census. And you can see that in 1995, the overwintering population in Iceland was predominantly in the south and southwest of the country. Then in 2000, hoopers started to overwinter in northern Iceland, especially around Lake Mývatn and to the north of Lake Mývatn, which is just here. And then in the 2020 census, again, we confirmed that hoopers were still wintering in the south and southwest of Iceland, up in the north, but also we started to get birds wintering in the west and northwest of the country. So we drilled down into that a little bit further, and there was 5 sites that held over 100 hoopers at the time of the census in Iceland, those being Lake Mývatn with 198 hoopers, Steklavir, excuse my Icelandic, saw flocks of 375 and 222 hoopers at the time. And up in Breiðafjörður, there was 120 hoopers there. And in Björnafjörður, there was 312. And then comparing distribution to the 1995 census in Britain, you can see that there's this sort of belt across Ireland and into Northern Ireland. Patchy distribution within Scotland itself, and then fewer sites being represented in England itself. But compare that to the January 2020 census, again, you've got this nice band of sites across the Republic and into Northern Ireland, as well as lots of other sites in the Republic. Scotland, again, lots more sites being represented there. We've got birds up on the Shetlands and Orkneys and the Outer Hebrides. And then in England, you can see that the numbers of overwintering in England have, in comparison, have increased, and especially big numbers of hoopers wintering there. So we drill down into that a little bit further. What I've done here is the top number in the orange box here represents the number of sites that held hooper swans in each country, and in brackets, in parentheses underneath, that is how many sites were represented with hoopers in the previous census. So in Scotland, 231 sites were found to hold hoopers, of which 11 held between 100 and 700. In England, 71 sites held hooper swans, with 2 of those sites holding over 1,000 individuals. 9 sites in Wales, 239 in the Republic of Ireland, of which four held over 500 individuals, and then up in the in Northern Ireland, 48 sites held hooper swans, of which 1 site held over 1,000. So looking at those principal sites of Lough Neagh and Beg in Northern Ireland, here, the Neen and the Ouse Washes in East England, those top 3 sites held 32.3% of the overall January 2020 census total. And those being Lough Neagh, so 2,228 individuals were found there. On the Neen Washes, 2,618 individuals, and then on the Ouse Washes, 9,122 individuals were found there. So let's take a closer look on the Ouse Washes, which is probably the most important site for hooper swans in England and in the wintering range for this population. Since the census began in 1986, when just 341 swans were found there, numbers have been increasing to this time round when just over 9,000 were found, and that equated to 57.2% of the English wintering population at the time. It's an incredible site. it's a really important, the Nene and Ouse washes are really important wetland sites in east of England, not just for Hooper swans, but for Bewick swans as well, and a whole host of other wetland water birds too. It's a massive expanse of wetland that is twinned on either side by agricultural land where farmers grow sugar beet, and when they harvest the sugar beet, they leave the tops on the fields, and the sugar beet twinned with the wetlands that provide really safe roosting habitat for the swans are what make the Ouse washes really attractive to the population. And then a snapshot of the breeding results at the time. Again, we try and census more. We try and count more of the families during the international swan censuses than we do year on year through monitoring. And this time around, over 31,000 individual hoopers had their ages assessed, of which 17.3% were cygnets of the year. And you can see those figures in Iceland were 20.2% of flocks contain young. In Scotland, 21.2% did, and Northern Ireland had 20%, and Wales had 21%. And that's probably reflects the tendency of Hooper swans breeding pairs and families sticking closer to the breeding grounds, whereas the non-breeders and the failed breeders are traveling further south. So perhaps those individuals in East England and England itself holding 14.1%. Okay, so looking at demographic drivers of the change in population size, is this due to successful breeding seasons? Is it a change in mortality over time, or both? Well, we looked at breeding success over time, and we saw that this was not associated with temperatures on either the breeding grounds or wintering grounds. And despite mean temperatures on the breeding grounds up in Iceland increasing since the 1980s, there was no, it wasn't seen to be associated with the temperature. And there was no clear sign, no clear trend in breeding over time, potentially suggesting that survival may be the demographic driver of this increased population. So it is a steadily increasing population. And so I think further analyses need to be undertaken to look at annual mortality rates and see whether these are decreased or changed over time. And to do this, we could potentially use our nice long-term life history study that we have of 42 years. Okay, so in any population monitoring program, it's always good to have a good knowledge of population delineation and movement, interchange between two populations that may occur near each other. And so as a little off the side of the desk study that we carried out between us, we looked at whether interchange was happening with the population that Preben has just been talking about. So to do this, we contacted Hooper swan ringers in Iceland, in Europe, as well as worked with ringing schemes, and that resulted in over 18,000 hoopers being ringed in 17 European countries. And I've just heard that paper, it's been accepted and will be published later this week, hopefully online in BTO's Ringing and Migration. I think this map here beautifully shows the two distributions of the two populations that we have in Europe. And if I may just show this video, our long-term study of 42 years, our long-term ringing program was fed into this interchange study. I just wanted to show you how we go about catching Hooper swans in Britain with this really cool video. Okay, so on our reserves, we feed the birds into these pipes. We call them swan pipes. They get fed into there 3 or 4 times a day. So the birds are routinely used to going in there. We then close the door behind them. A big team of staff and volunteers wade out and corral the birds into these pens here. The birds are then caught with some jackets before they go through the ringing process.
Unringed female for you, Dave.
Female.
Thank you. Skull is 172.8.
And then whilst we have the bird in hand, we like to take as much information as possible. So sometimes we x-ray them to look at whether they're carrying shot-in pellets. as this Buick Swan here is having done.
You need to
Before a quick health check, and the bird is then released. And over the years, we've built up a really nice
Extend.
network.
Hey.
There we go. It's great fun. Okay, so back to the interchange study. So we compiled all the data together, and that showed that 118 Hooper swans that had been ringed in the range of the Icelandic population, so in Iceland, Britain Island, or the Faroes, had occurred on mainland Europe, so in the range of the other population. And looking back at the other side, 42 northwest mainland European Hoopers had been detected in the Icelandic population range. And that is presuming that the birds were in the correct geographical range at ringing. So we confirmed through this study that interchange between the two populations does still occur as recent as 2021, though the total numbers switching populations is very low, under 1%. And this gives increased confidence in the population censuses, so should not have led to sort of any major inaccuracies or biases in the population totals. And through this work, we were able to update the previous estimates of the number of Icelandic ring birds, of the number of Icelandic birds on mainland Europe from 600 individuals down to 434. So just a quick recap. So the total of 43,255 swans represented a 27.2 increase since the previous census. Overall, 36.8% of the population were in England, 33.4% in the Republic of Ireland, with 11% in Scotland, 10% in Northern Ireland, and 6.8% in Iceland. But despite numbers increasing in both Republic and Northern Ireland since 2015, the proportion of the overall population in the Republic of Ireland was significantly lower in 2020 compared to the other censuses, whereas the proportions in Scotland and England were significantly higher in 2020. Excuse me. All that is remained for me to say is thank you to our partners who helped to participate and get this census off the ground, to my co-authors, of which 3 are here today, Eileen, Kev, and Graham. Thank you for your help. And of course, thank you to all the observers and counters who helped us with the census, of which there was over 500 this time. So yeah, thank you.